Hello, my name is Austin Derrickson, and today I'll be taking you through a map I made for Quake using trenchbroom. This video will be going over some of the general game design processes that I've used, as well as some reasoning for some things that I've implemented. So this first area, we start off in this table, and the player can see and look around, and they're almost in this laboratory-like area with this giant machine above them. If we look around, we see some other interesting objects. The point of this first area is to reinforce or to teach the player about movement. So they have time and area to move, while also not being able to progress unless they are able to jump. Even if the player knows the controls, especially assuming since this is an older game, I've implemented a unique puzzle for the player to try to do. Is if they're able to jump, go over here and push this button, what they can do is they can see this giant object moving. So this machine that was stationary before is now moving, and just to introduce and kind of hint the player towards that, I've added a different texture right above so the player can possibly be like, oh, that's kind of weird that this is different. Furthermore, this industrial place is now nicely contrasted with this more stone and primitive area, with a small shrine and a little armor to reward the player for finding this area. So if we go through and go back, and assuming the player has completed and mastered some movement, we can go up and have this little drop off, just to remind the player that this is final and there's no going back after dropping down. Furthermore, once they do drop down, if they do encounter an enemy or something and they try to backtrack, they won't be able to go and they'll be at a disadvantage for trying to run away, especially since they have the low ground. So if we go up here, we're introduced to our first enemy, which we can defeat pretty easily, especially because he gets stun locked if we shoot him enough. This enemy is ranged, but I wanted to introduce them up close since its weakness is kind of being up close. I'm having these close quarters and surprising the player, increasing the previous pace, which was just trying to jump. So now, if we go through the door, and we have a little area where we can see the area we were just in. So I want to pull the player in, so making them want to observe this area, while also using some enemy sounds to let them know that there's some enemies over here. So after isolating that first enemy and allowing them to experience it by itself with any outside distractions, I've implemented and introduced these two of the same enemies to increase the pace and difficulty, offering the player more variety. Now after this, we have this dog. And in this hallway, we give the player enough time to react to the hallway without needing and having time to move backward into this large area. So having the dog jump forward and kind of forcing the player to react quickly. And also, again, isolating the dog from the other enemies so that the player has a chance to experience them and learn about them without any outside interference. So in this next area, I first introduced verticality. So we can see we have this first enemies, and since the only enemies the player has faced so far have all been on the eye level, I wanted to introduce some enemies that would offer more playful and interesting gameplay. So if we are able to shoot up at this enemy and accidentally shoot one of these explosive barrels that I put right next to him on purpose, the player will also be able to put two to two together that, oh, if I shoot these crates, they'll explode and do damage to the enemies. So now we're just kind of left in this area. We have a door to our right, and we have this giant door here. We try to access this door, we see that we need the silver key. There's this icon down here just to reinforce that key is needed. So some ammo just to replenish the player. And if we go forward, we see a grunt. Again, isolating the enemy from any outside interference, allowing them to experience it. And then we have this explosion barrel, which I'm going to save for a second. And if we try to get this key, we see that there's some enemies that pop down below. An interesting reason, and if the player is able to have some trigger discipline, what you can see is you can rather shoot that box or have the enemy shoot them themselves instead of shooting that box when we have this one grunt here. So continuing, now that we have the key, what we can do is go back here, have this door open up, and we have this little lift. Now this area, if the player happened to run and try to cheese these enemies, they're now come face to face and at a disadvantage since they have two enemies on either side of them. So now that the pace has kind of calmed down and that we don't really have any more enemies, what I wanted to do was kind of have a difficulty spike since we've had this linear rush from one enemy, two enemies, one enemy, two enemies, then three enemies, and now I kind of want to keep this difficulty going. So here we have some discrete combinatorial with our enemies that we've experienced so far, two of the grunts, one Rottweiler, and one Enforcer that we've already seen before. Just to increase the difficulty and the pace for the player, since so far it's been pretty linear. Now, as a reward for the player, what I wanted to do was I wanted to give them some nails and a new weapon, especially a long-range weapon, since so far we've only been in these close quarters areas. So now, again, introducing some verticality, but I wanted to give the player a chance to use their new weapon without really having any consequences. So if they're able to cheese the enemy from here, you can see that they're able to shoot them, and you can hear some enemies. So if we go out now, we see that we have these two enemies that are ambushing us, that we can heard before from shooting this previous enemy. So shooting this enemy and kind of trying to snipe them will reward the player in more than just having one enemy down and kind of learning about that enemy. We also have the chance to kind of reveal these new enemies. While also utilizing this large area, I'm introducing this new enemy that is also long-ranged. Again, reinforcing the fact that it's isolated so that the player has a chance to experience and learn about them without having outside distractions like those three enemies. So now we can see a contrast from where previously where we had this kind of refined metal, and now we see some rust, even some snow, and we have a change from those fluorescent lights to these kind of halogen bulbs. So now we can see some rock, which is a good contrast from where we previous are with all this industrial and metal. So if we keep going, increasing the difficulty since we just had three enemies, went back down to one, and now again combining the enemies that we've seen so far and giving them new interactions. So now replenishing the enemy and offering some ambient wind just to let them know, hey, we're close to outside, and transitioning from this kind of first area where we had metal everywhere, metal walls, no metal ceiling except for this first area, and now this area has all metal, all rock walls, and we can see some snow. And once we go out here, we see that we have some new enemies, or some new combination of new enemies. So we have these dogs, we have these enforcers, and we have two of the wizards that we just met. So again, just increasing this discrete combinatorial with these enemies, and we even have a grunt up here that the player can jump up these boxes and get their supplies if they're especially low. And what we have here in these cages is we have this demon. Now this demon can't hurt us obviously unless we get too close. I think it can do some damage, but assuming there it goes. Assuming that we are able to have some distance and kind of sadistically kill the demon that can't fight back, what we have is a chance to go in here and we see this new shrine, which is a little secret that if you kill the demon, it reveals this little secret door. So again, we have the shrine and our reward for the player, kind of connecting the two, even though this kind of satanic shrine is kind of weird and kind of nice contrast for what we have out here. And also in case the player may not have understood that we have this nice trail going out, and we can see a kind of change in texture, which is a little darker than the surrounding, and that leads all the way in here. So now we have that. What we can do is go into this area, and we have this nice rock. Again, just contrasting and showing the player that we're going back into this industrial-like area. So again, changing the pace from what we've had before with all these different doors. I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning where we had this jumping puzzle. And you can see that we even have some flashing lights and some ambient noise from the bulbs. So here, what we can do is we see this demon, and what happens is we have this interesting interaction where the player is kind of surprised. And also, if the player tries to move back, what I've done is I've put a door right here so the player is trapped and that falls down once they enter this area so that the player can't back up. Now, if the player, like me, was a coward and jumped down, they won't be able to get those power-ups up here, but what they can do is receive some health and ammo over here. So now, seeing this large area, if we come over here, we have this nice contrast again, bringing the player back to this outdoor open area. Since what I hope was happen is that they kind of were mesmerized by it and had this really wow moment, and now we have another wow moment, bringing them back outside and hopefully bringing them where they want to be. So now we have some, we can see down, so the player's a chance before any enemies. We can even try shooting them down here and try to cheese them, but we can also see some power-ups, some interesting items, and a little bit of a platform puzzle coming up ahead. So we have this ammo just to push the player downward and refill some of their supplies, and we can just hear one enemy right now, and so we see we have some of these wizards. And really utilizing this area and increasing the difficulty from the previous area where we had only one enemy, even though it's a harder enemy in my opinion, still just giving them more to play with and utilizing especially the enemies, the enemy types, since these are ranged and can really fly wherever. I wanted to give them these nice open area for them to kind of use them to their fullest. So now if we go here, I also give the player an opportunity to cheese these enemies, just to kind of make them feel smart, since they have an opportunity to shoot them beforehand. Now if we go over here, what we have is we have this nice jumping puzzle, and since this enemy's shooting at me, I'll do him a favor. So we have these nice platforming puzzles just to give the player some different gameplay from just the kind of run and gun and shoot, even though that is a great part of Quake also is the platforming. So we have this invincibility, so if the player does try to make it over here and they're scared to go back, even if they fall in the lava, they have some um, you know, safety, and it's not as punishing as they might think. So I have some nice puzzling platforming over here, and what we can do is we can see this new area, which is a contrast to what we've seen before in this huge industrial and these labs. We now have this almost like church, reminds me of a church area. So if we go in, we can see these torches. And ahead we have this nice lava area and also this winding staircase. I'm going to go over here for the sake of what I want to show. If we go over here, we can see that we have two enemies on each side. I'm just kind of offering some ambushing and letting the enemies have some opportunities. Furthermore, if we come over here, we can see that we have more enemies hiding behind these cages, offering more some more interesting opportunities and enemy interactions. Now we have this area, and we can also see that we have this little weird door here, and I'll save that for a little bit. But if we go back and kind of backtrack to this spiraling staircase, what we can do is we have these dogs. Just to remind them and kind of reinforce, even though they had them up there, if they didn't have them up there, reinforcing it down here since they haven't seen them in a while. So now I have this slow opening door to give the player enough time to just kind of process the enemy in front of them, since they see that the enemy is not attacking them yet, and it's kind of like this enemy is praying in front of the shrine, and to kind of push the player in here and motivate them to interact with this enemy, I've put a thunder gun or a lightning gun right behind the enemy. So if we snake up on it and we can get the lightning gun, we can quickly finish them without really having much danger. So then after doing that, we have this little area with some stairs leading upward for the player to go, and we have some cells, some health, some shells, and some nails for the player, and we can see the similar door that we had before. And if we kind of run along this, we can see it's an invisible wall. And again, I wanted to reinforce this since we can see that there's a different trim here, and there's also a different rusty trim here for the player to walk on, and they can walk over here and try to get to that area. So now we're in this final area, and we have this final lift. So I'm going to bring out the laser gun. So here we can see that we have these items, and we have this really sudden fall, and now we have this shambler right in front of us. So if we have some time, we can maybe sneak up, grab some health, and then we have to attack it. So I have a lot of nice little packs for here, so also rewarding the player for going down to that tunnel and facing that enemy, giving them a gun that makes it somewhat easy to face this final boss. Opposed to if they didn't, you'd have to use the shotgun and the nail gun in order to really do this. And one thing I wanted to kind of come back to is this giant item in above. This is the same item we had in the beginning area where the player was under it, and I kind of wanted to put two and two together, maybe oh wow, this huge thing is where I was, and that like that huge item was above me when I first started. So now that we're done with this, we can come over here and step on the plate, and it's the entire map. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.